Hi, we are Group 5 and today we will be discussing Exercise 8, the skeletal system of toad. The objectives of the experiment are: number 1, differentiate macroscopically and microscopically the two types of bone, compact and spongy. Number 2, identify bones of toad. Number 3, identify the functions of important bones. First, we will be labeling the compact bone. As we can see, the first arrow is pointing to the haversian canal. Haversian canals are tiny tubes or tunnels in the cortical bone that contain nerve fibers and a few capillaries. This permits bone to receive oxygen and nutrients without having to be substantially vascularized. These canals also communicate with bone cells via canaliculi, which are specific connections. The haversian canal is surrounded by a long hollow corridor called the osteon, which is the primary structural unit of compact bone. It is made up of concentric bone layers called lamellae. Lastly, the lacuna is a tiny space in the matrix due to the deposition of calcium salts around them, and osteocytes are trapped within it. Next is the spongy bone. The arrows in this picture is pointing to the trabeculae and hematopoietic tissues. In cancellous or spongy bone, trabeculae create a 3D porous lattice, the microarchitecture of which dictates its mechanical performance, including macroscopic strength. These plates are arranged in such a way that they create vast interconnected cave-like chambers. These areas are useful for storage and as pockets for the blood-forming cells, also known as hematopoietic tissue, found in the bone marrow.
For the next part, we will label and define the parts of a toad's endoskeleton. The first structure is the skull. As you can see in the dorsal view, a frog's skull is flattened dorsoventrally, surrounding the brain and sense organs. The first arrow is the nasal bone. It is a pair of flat, triangular bones on the surface of the skull. Now, posterior to the nasal bone is the sphenoethmoid. Behind the sphenoethmoid are two slender flat bones that appear as a single bone identified as the frontoparietal. The hammer-shaped bones at the sides of the skull are called squamosals. The frontoparietal is conjoined with the prootic, which forms the bones of the auditory region. Lastly are the occipital condyles, which are part of prominent bones. The next part is the ventral view of the skull. The first arrow points to the premaxillae, which bears teeth on its anteroventral surface and is the most anterior bone of the upper jaw. Next are the maxillary teeth, which are the sharp teeth of a frog. The third arrow points to the slender, rod-like bones posterior to the vomiers. The T-shaped or dagger-shaped bones refers to the parasphenoid, which forms the floor of the cranium. Next is the quadratujugal, or simply known as the cheekbones. Lastly, the pterygoid is the three-rayed bone that serves as a brace and forms the roof of the mouth. Next is the lateral view of the skull. Here are the frontoparietal, the nasal bone, and the squamosal. Next is the mandible. The first arrow is the mentomycelium that links the two halves of the jaw. The next arrow points to the dentary. The dentary bears the teeth of the frog. It is a thin bone that integrates the mentomycelium in the anterior part of the angulosplenial. The angulosplenial is a strong bone that forms the inner and ventral parts of the mandible. The hyoid apparatus' principal role serves as an attachment structure for the tongue and muscles on the oral cavity's floor. We can see here that the alar process is a lateral expansion on the body of the hyoid apparatus. The body of the hyoid apparatus comprises hyaline cartilage in two pairs of processes. The posterior cornu is a pair of pointed, horn-like cartilages shorter than the anterior cornu. Lastly is the thyroid process, which is medial to the posterior cornu.
The vertebral column protects the spinal cord, posturing of body, and transmission during movement. In the image, we can see that there is a long rod with spiky protrusions. The long, thin, stick-looking structure is called the urostyle. The thick protrusion after the urostyle is called the sacral diapophysis. In the rod-looking area, the spiky top is called the neural spine. The circular-looking structure is called the atlas. The pectoral girdle is attached to the column via muscles. This allows the holding of the forelimbs and protection of soft organs. Also, this absorbs the impact from the landing from jumps, acting like a suspension mechanism. In the image, it looks like an inverted wrapping on a stick. On the edge, the big bone that seems to cover a large area is called the suprascapula. The rod-like structure is the clavicle. Below it is called the coracoid. Beside and underneath is called the glenoid cavity. The sternum is the long vertical structure. It provides the structure for the pectoral girdle to be connected and serves the purpose as the girdle does and facilitate expansion and contraction during respiration. The rhomboid structure on top is called the episternum. The long structure between the episternum and the clavicle is called the omosternum. Below the coracoid is the thin structure called the mesosternum. Below it is the semicircular structure called the xiphisternum. The pelvic girdle provides attachment to the claspers. The outer round looking figure is called the ischium. The inner round looking figure is called the acetabellum. Below it is the pubis symphysis, and the long rod protrusion is called the ilium. The bones of the forelimb provide support for moving or stationary movements and impact absorption. In the area of the fingers, the edge part is called the phalanges. Below it are the metacarpals. In the knuckle area, it is called the metacarpals. The entire area is connected to the radioulna, and the radioulna connects to the humerus. The bones of the hind limbs are for the purpose of propelling the entire body to the desired position. In the area of the feet are the metatarsals, which seemingly forms the body of the fingers and the connection to the entirety of the hand. Beyond it is the two short bones with a rift in between, which is called the tibial and fibular, respectively. This connects to the tibiofibula, which connects to the femur.
Guide questions. Number 1. Differentiate a compact bone from a spongy bone. Relate the structure with its corresponding function. The compact bone is the hard outer layer of the bone, while the spongy bone is its porous interior. Bones are protected and strengthened by the compact bone's hardness. The porous structure of the spongy bone makes the bone lighter, allowing muscles to move the bones easily. Number 2. Are the bones as solid and hard at the ends as in the middle of the shaft? Explain. No, it's not. The ends of the bone is called the epiphysis, and it is made up of cartilaginous structures. Therefore, it is not as hard as the middle of the shaft. The middle shaft is called diaphysis and is a hard structure with compact bone. Thank you for listening to our discussion about Exercise 8. Feel free to ask us questions in the comment section down below.